Michael Ash's disappearance from Renton, Washington, is a haunting case marked by concern and uncertainty. On April 15, 2023, he spoke with his parents in Massachusetts over the phone. The call left them deeply worried about his mental state, even though Michael reassured them that he had no intention of harming himself. Despite his assurances, his parents urged him to seek help at a hospital. At 12:08 a.m. on April 16th, Michael's father, still troubled by the conversation, called the Renton Police Department to request a welfare check. Officers went to Michael's condo, saw his car parked outside, but received no answer at the door. They checked a nearby hospital, but found no sign of him there either. A few hours later, at 1:40 a.m., Michael himself called 911. He said he was outside the emergency department of the hospital, suffering from a panic attack, and asked for police assistance. An officer called him back, but Michael explained he was now inside the emergency department and no longer needed help. However, at 5:51 a.m., he called 911 again. When officers arrived at his location, they offered him various resources and even a ride to the hospital, but Michael declined. The situation didn't meet the criteria for an involuntary commitment, so the officers had no legal grounds to take further action. Later that morning, at 11:44 a.m., one of Michael's friends called the police, reporting that Michael was experiencing a mental health crisis. The friend said Michael had checked into the hospital but left shortly after. An officer was dispatched to Michael's last known location and found him walking westbound on South 43rd Street, near Valley Medical Center, around noon. The officer encouraged him to call his family, which he did on April 17th. That call was the last contact anyone had with him. Concerned for their son, Michael's parents flew from Massachusetts to Washington on April 18th to search for him. They discovered some of his belongings, including laptops, phones, jackets, and other personal items, scattered in the mulch beds at Ron Regis Park. Among the items was a receipt from a CVS pharmacy on Southeast Carr Road, dated April 17th. Surveillance footage confirmed that Michael had been at the pharmacy at 9:31 a.m. that day. Michael's disappearance is completely out of character. He worked at the University of Washington and was known as a reliable employee. He was also dedicated to his martial arts training at a local dojo, and his family emphasized that he would not have missed work or training sessions without a compelling reason. Due to concerns about his mental state, authorities advised the public not to approach Michael if they see him, but to contact the police immediately. On December 2nd, Sharon Anderson set out for what should have been a routine day of Christmas shopping at the Everett Mall in Everett, Washington. At 9 a.m., she kissed her husband goodbye and left their home in Stanwood, promising to return by 4:30 p.m. When she didn't come back as planned, her family grew increasingly worried and began searching for her. The first sign of Sharon's disappearance was her locked pickup truck, which her best friend discovered at 10 p.m. in the mall parking lot near Mervyn's department store. Inside the truck, everything seemed untouched. Her cellular phone and the handgun she carried for protection were still there, but there were no presents. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Strangely, there has been no activity on Sharon's credit cards, bank accounts, or Social Security number since that day. Her loved ones scoured local pawn shops, hoping for a lead if someone had tried to sell her distinctive wedding ring, a custom-designed white gold band with a central diamond flanked by black onyx, but found nothing. The lack of any trace deepened the mystery. Authorities noted that there were no obvious signs of foul play at the scene, yet Sharon's sudden disappearance made little sense. At the time, she was a respected social worker for the Department of Social and Health Services, known for her responsibility and reliability. Her friends and family were adamant that she would never voluntarily leave without telling someone or abandon her life. As the days turned into weeks and then years, the silence surrounding Sharon's case became deafening. Her family's hopes for answers remain unmet, and the puzzle of what happened that December morning remains unsolved. John Atkins set sail from Garibaldi, Oregon on July 4, 2009, aboard his 48-foot fishing boat, the Tiger. Accompanying him on the trip were two companions. Walter Bremer, and Aaron Dean Riemann. Their destination was Owaco, Washington, where the Tiger was scheduled for a 10-day dry dock repair. According to Bremer and Riemann, Atkins was last seen around 1 a.m. on July 5th at a tavern in Owaco. That same day, he had also spoken to his family. Strangely, he never returned to the boat for the scheduled repairs, a significant departure from his usual dependable behavior. His companions claimed they waited for him until the next morning before deciding to sail the Tiger back to Garibaldi without him. When Atkins failed to return home to Albany, Oregon, his family reported him missing on July 7th. The case took a dark turn 9 days after Atkins was reported missing. Bremer abruptly relocated to Hawaii and, during a subsequent police interview, told a chilling story. He claimed to have witnessed Riemann beat and strangle Atkins to death on the Tiger on the night of July 5th. According to Bremer, Riemann threatened to kill him and his girlfriend unless he helped cover up the crime. Bremer described cleaning the boat with bleach and disposing of Atkins's body at sea. Evidence on the Tiger seemed to support Bremer's account. Investigators discovered a broken window in the wheelhouse and blood from both Riemann and Atkins nearby. Bremer stated that Riemann had forced Atkins's head through the window before using an extension cord to strangle him. In October 2009, Riemann was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and first-degree theft. Photos of Riemann, Bremer, and the Tiger were circulated as part of the investigation. In exchange for his testimony against Riemann, Bremer was granted immunity from prosecution. Initially, Riemann admitted only to disposing of Atkins's body at sea, a gross misdemeanor, while denying any role in the murder. However, he eventually pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and received an 11-year prison sentence. At his sentencing, Riemann cryptically remarked, "I did not take John's life, but nor did I protect it," accepting his punishment while maintaining partial innocence. The plot thickened in 2012 when Bremer himself was convicted of a murder in Hawaii, a case that also involved strangulation. Following Bremer's conviction, Riemann wrote a letter to the prosecutor, asserting that Bremer was the true killer of John Atkins. Riemann claimed he had been coerced into silence by threats to his family and now felt free to tell the truth. In a subsequent evidentiary hearing, Riemann testified that he had witnessed Bremer commit the murder, a story vastly different from the one he had previously told the police, his family, and his attorney. He attempted to appeal his guilty plea, arguing that he was factually innocent and that his confession had been made under duress due to Bremer's threats against his children and grandchildren in Hawaii. Despite these revelations, Riemann's appeal was denied in 2020. John Atkins's disappearance leaves behind a legacy of questions and uncertainty. Born and raised in Salem, Oregon, Atkins graduated from Sprague High School before working for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Later, he spent 19 years as a technician at Hewlett-Packard. Just before his disappearance, he and Riemann had embarked on a commercial fishing venture together, purchasing the Tiger and hiring Bremer as their deckhand. Given the tangled web of conflicting testimonies and evidence, foul play remains strongly suspected in John Atkins's case. On the afternoon of July 26, 1992, Marilyn Arnhold left her Milton, Washington home after an argument with her husband about their 2 young sons, who were not at home at the time. Frustrated and upset, Marilyn walked out without saying where she was headed or when she would return. She was never seen or heard from again. 3 days later, just before midnight on July 29th, her black and green 1967 Mercury Cougar was discovered abandoned under the Meridian Street overpass on Levee Road. The car showed no signs of a struggle, and there was no evidence of foul play. Despite extensive efforts, including divers searching the nearby Puyallup River, no further clues about Marilyn's fate were uncovered. Marilyn's family found her disappearance deeply troubling, especially given her circumstances and future plans. Although she was having marital problems and reportedly intended to file for divorce, they insisted she would never have abandoned her life or her children. She had too much to look forward to. She was preparing to graduate from Tacoma Community College with straight-A grades within the week and was working toward becoming a registered nurse. Additionally, She had planned to visit her sisters in California and had arranged to breed her prize purebred Rottweiler, demonstrating her commitment to her future. At the time of her disappearance, Marilyn had been employed for 18 months as a licensed practical nurse at Good Samaritan Hospital in Puyallup. Her dedication to her work made her absence all the more unusual. She was not the type to miss a shift without notice. Although the scene around her abandoned car suggested no immediate signs of violence, investigators have not ruled out foul play. David Adams was last seen on May 3, 1968, in Issaquah, Washington. That day, the 8-year-old had taken the bus home from school to his family's new house on Southeast Tiger Mountain Road, a place they'd only moved into 2 months prior. After dropping off his school things, David went to play at a friend's house nearby. His mother expected him home for dinner at 5 p.m. When David called to ask if he could stay longer, she told him it was time to come back. He set off on a familiar local trail, a shortcut through the woods, but he never arrived. When 15 minutes passed and David still hadn't come home, his mother grew worried. She called his friend's house, only to discover he had already left. Panic quickly set in. Soon, an extensive search of the surrounding area began, but there was no trace of David. The boy had vanished without a clue, and he has never been seen or heard from again. Initially, authorities considered natural dangers. The rugged landscape had its risks. Some speculated David might have fallen into one of the abandoned mine shafts scattered across the region. Others feared he had been attacked by a cougar. However, as time passed and no evidence supported these theories, investigators began to believe that something far more sinister had happened. They now think David was abducted. In 2009, a new lead brought renewed hope and more questions. Police announced they were investigating a former neighbor as a suspect in David's disappearance. At the time of the incident, the man had been 20 years old and was believed to be the last person to see David alive. Search dogs traced David sent to the man's former home, adding weight to their suspicions. Investigators reported that the man had been evasive during questioning, lacked a convincing alibi, and even failed a polygraph test. Now residing in Lewis County, Washington, he continues to maintain his innocence. David was the second oldest of 6 siblings and a 3rd grader at Clark Elementary School. By all accounts, he was a bright and well-behaved student, adored by his family. His parents, who still live in the area, have spent decades hoping for answers that never came. Despite the passage of time, they have never given up hope of finding out what really happened to their son. David's disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in the region. Wendy O'Neal's disappearance is a tragic and unresolved mystery tied to a man with a dark and violent history. On the early morning of April 25, 1987, Wendy was last seen leaving La Paloma Restaurant in Bellingham, Washington. She was driving her distinctive red 1972 Ford Torino with a black vinyl top. Accompanying her was the restaurant's bartender, a drifter who introduced himself as Mike Johnson. However, Mike Johnson was an alias. His real name was Darren O'Neal, a man who would later become notorious for his crimes. Wendy never made it home, and she has not been heard from since. Days later, on May 2nd, Wendy's car was discovered abandoned in Eugene, Oregon. Inside the vehicle, authorities found O'Neal's fingerprints, linking him directly to her disappearance. When police searched Wendy's apartment, they uncovered chilling evidence of violence. The scene revealed pools of blood, semen stains, and blood-soaked bedsheets and linens, pointing to a struggle and raising fears of foul play. Meanwhile, O'Neal had vanished, leaving a trail of theft and deceit behind him. He had worked at La Paloma Restaurant for only 2 days before disappearing, taking the cash register contents and several bottles of liquor. U.S. Customs later reported that O'Neal had been photographed driving across the border into Canada in Wendy's car alone. Wendy's disappearance came just weeks after another woman, Robin Smith, vanished. Robin's body was found in May 1987, and O'Neal was later charged with her murder. Authorities believe Wendy may have met a similar fate. O'Neal eluded capture for several months, but was finally arrested in September 1987. In 1989, he pleaded guilty to Robin Smith's murder and was sentenced to life in prison. He was also convicted of stealing Wendy's car and for an unrelated kidnapping and rape. Despite being behind bars, O'Neal has not faced charges in Wendy's case due to insufficient evidence. Wendy O'Neal was a beauty school student and a devoted mother to 2 young children. Her disappearance was completely out of character, as she would not have abandoned her family without warning. Although her body has never been found, investigators suspect foul play, and O'Neal remains the prime suspect in her presumed murder. To this day, Wendy's case remains unsolved, leaving her family without closure. Darren D. O'Neal, a man whose violent actions shattered multiple lives, is serving his sentence, but Wendy's loved ones continue to seek answers about what happened that fateful April night. Tracy Brazzle was last seen in the early hours of May 27, 1995, at approximately 1:45 a.m. in Everett, Washington. At the time, she was leaving Kodiak Ron's pub, located in the 12200 block of Airport Road along State Route 99 South. This marked the last confirmed sighting of Tracy before she vanished without a trace. 3 days after her disappearance, her car, a white 1993 Ford Probe with the Washington State license, plate number 081GDL, was found parked only half a block away from her home at Keeler's Corner Apartments, situated in the 4500 block of 164th Street, southwest in North Linwood. Strangely, the passenger window of the car had been broken, but there was no broken glass present on the ground, raising suspicions. A small bloodstain was also found on the passenger door. Authorities determined that the vehicle had been driven roughly 25 miles since Tracy had last fueled it. Further investigation into the scene suggested that Tracy had indeed made it back to her apartment after leaving the bar, but after that, she disappeared and was never heard from again. At the time of her disappearance, Tracy was working as a hairstylist at the Great Clip Salon in Mill Creek, Washington. She had quit her job 2 days earlier, on May 25th, and had not picked up her final paycheck. Her mother recalled their close relationship, noting that Tracy would visit her daily. According to family members, it was completely out of character for Tracy to leave without informing anyone, which made her sudden disappearance all the more concerning. Searches conducted in the area yielded no answers, and despite efforts from authorities and volunteers, there was no sign of Tracy. Her parents, who were divorced at the time, were left to cope with the uncertainty and grief. Her father, who lived in New Jersey, was particularly affected by the disappearance, as the case unfolded without clear leads. Over a decade later, in May 2011, authorities made a significant announcement revealing they had identified Danny Ross Giles as a suspect in Tracy's disappearance. Giles was also suspected in the murder of Patty Berry, a 26-year-old woman who had vanished in July 1995 and whose body was discovered a week later, stabbed to death. The breakthrough in Tracy's case came when DNA evidence linked Giles to a blood-like spot found on the exterior of Tracy's car, as well as the crime scene in Patty Berry's case. At the time, Giles was already incarcerated for a felony conviction involving indecent exposure, and he had a long history of sexual offense convictions, including a 1987 rape charge. In December 2012, Giles was formally charged with both women's murders. He later wrote a letter from jail in which he denied any involvement in Tracy's disappearance, but admitted to being in her car and apartment, claiming he had been there to buy drugs. Despite this admission, the case against him in Tracy's disappearance was dismissed after his conviction in Patty Berry's case in 2014, with the charges against him in Tracy's case being dropped without prejudice. This meant that, while he was not convicted for Tracy's disappearance, the charges could potentially be refiled in the future if new evidence emerged. In 1997, after her father appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, several unconfirmed sightings of Tracy were reported. However, none of these leads turned out to be substantial enough to resolve her case. Given the unusual circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the eventual connection to Danny Ross Giles, foul play is strongly suspected in Tracy's case. Her family continues to search for answers, clinging to the hope that one day they may learn what truly happened to Tracy Brazzle. Pamela Bennett disappeared from her home in Clarkston, Washington on August 31, 1998. She lived on Beachview Boulevard in the Riverview section of the city, and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance have puzzled investigators and loved ones ever since. When friends and family first noticed Pamela was missing, the scene at her house raised immediate red flags. It looked as if she had left in a hurry. The back door was unlocked, and valuable rafting equipment, which she normally would have secured, was left out in the backyard. This was unusual for someone as meticulous as Pamela. Nothing appeared to be missing from the house, except for two things: her car and her beloved dog, Daisy, a 2-year-old Vizsla. Adding to the mystery, Pamela hadn't arranged for anyone to water her plants, a task she always took care of when she planned to be away. These details painted a picture of an abrupt and unplanned departure, fueling concerns about what might have happened. A few weeks after her disappearance, there was a confirmed sighting of Pamela at a mailboxes etc. store in Pullman, Washington, adding a perplexing twist to the case. Yet, no one reported her missing until about 3 weeks after she vanished. When the authorities began their investigation, they made a chilling discovery. Pamela's dark green 1995 Ford Mustang ragtop was found abandoned in the parking lot of the Zona Ria Plaza Mall in Tijuana, Mexico. The car was unlocked, the keys still in the ignition, and there was no sign of Pamela or her dog. Strangely, the vehicle had been wiped clean of fingerprints, leaving no immediate clues for investigators to follow. There was no evidence of foul play, but the scene only deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. At the time, Pamela had been navigating a complicated personal life. She was divorced and had been dating a man she knew as Joseph Blake. However, his real name was Ronald Reagan, a revelation that would open a new chapter of intrigue. Reagan had vanished on July 23, 1998, over a month before Pamela disappeared. He dropped out of sight after police obtained a warrant to search his van for drug paraphernalia. Just days after Pamela went missing, on September 3rd, authorities uncovered the remains of a methamphetamine lab in Reagan's home in Lenoir, Idaho. The lab was far from small-scale. Investigators determined it had produced a staggering $13 million worth of high-quality methamphetamine, churning out 20 to 30 pounds every week for distribution in California. Reagan had financed the operation, but by the time the police discovered the lab, he was long gone. Adding another layer of complexity, Reagan had defaulted on payments for the home after making a $10,000 down payment the previous year. Pamela's connection to Reagan became a focal point of the investigation. She had visited his Lenoir residence several times and had confided in her best friend that she suspected he was involved in the drug trade. She expressed growing fears about his activities and had even mentioned wanting to end their relationship. Whether Reagan's drug operation had anything to do with Pamela's disappearance remains unclear, but the timing and circumstances suggest a potential link. The story took another turn in 2000 when Drug Enforcement Agency officials arrested Ronald Reagan and a male accomplice at San Francisco International Airport. There were unconfirmed reports that a woman had been with them, but managed to escape during the arrest. Authorities speculated that if this woman existed, she might have been Pamela. However, no concrete evidence ever surfaced to support this theory. Reagan was later convicted of possessing 2 pounds of methamphetamine and died in prison without ever revealing what he knew about Pamela's disappearance. Since that day in August 1998, there has been no trace of Pamela. She hasn't used her credit cards, her social security number, or made contact with any family members. In 2007, after nearly a decade of uncertainty and anguish for her loved ones, she was declared legally dead. Her case remains unsolved. Althea Blankenship and her young son Jeffrey were last seen on March 27, 1973, in their hometown of Port Townsend, Washington. They lived with a man named Glenn Allen Bagley, who would later become a central figure in the mysterious and troubling circumstances surrounding their disappearance. According to Bagley, on that fateful day, he drove Althea and Jeffrey to the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Althea had told friends and family they were planning to travel to Greece, where her parents were vacationing. Their itinerary was supposed to include a United Airlines flight to New York City, followed by a connecting flight to Greece. However, what seemed like an ordinary trip quickly turned into an enduring mystery. There was no record that Althea or Jeffrey ever boarded any flights that day. They never arrived in Greece, and no one has heard from them since. The lack of travel records raised immediate suspicions, but the trail went cold, and the details of their disappearance remained elusive. As the years passed, investigators began to focus their attention on Bagley, the man who had dropped them off at the airport, or so he claimed. Bagley became the prime suspect not only in the disappearance of Althea and Jeffrey, but also in the 1976 disappearance of his ex-wife, Esther Gessler. The connection between these cases only deepened the cloud of suspicion surrounding him. Despite his claims that Althea and Jeffrey had gone on vacation, evidence began to emerge that contradicted his story. In 2002, nearly 3 decades after Althea and Jeffrey vanished, Althea's cousin made a chilling discovery. She found Althea's passport in a relative's home, and it had no travel stamps, no entries at all. This crucial piece of evidence suggested that Althea had never left the country. Furthermore, she had never been issued another passport, making it highly unlikely that she and Jeffrey could have traveled internationally. Since Jeffrey was a minor, he would have needed to travel on his mother's passport, reinforcing the conclusion that they had never made it to Greece. Adding another layer to the mystery, Althea's cousin also found a collection of letters from Bagley to Althea, indicating they had been romantically involved. This revelation raised questions about the true nature of their relationship and what might have happened on the day they were last seen. Was there a conflict or betrayal that led to their disappearance? After Althea and Jeffrey vanished, Bagley's actions only fueled further suspicion. He moved to the Philippines not long after the disappearance of Esther Gessler in 1976. He settled in Manila and worked as a civil engineer, effectively distancing himself from the ongoing investigation in Washington. Despite repeated efforts by law enforcement to build a case against him, Bagley never returned to the U.S. or cooperated with authorities. Over the years, investigators tried to piece together the puzzle, but without cooperation from Bagley or additional evidence, the case remained unsolved. In February 2016, Glenn Allen Bagley died of cancer in the Philippines, taking whatever secrets he might have had about Althea and Jeffrey's disappearance to the grave. His death marked the end of a chapter, but provided no closure for the Blankenship family or the investigators who had spent decades searching for answers. Althea Blankenship was born in Virginia and graduated from Shoreline High School in 1967. She was a young mother with a bright future ahead, and Jeffrey was just a child, full of potential. Their disappearance left a void in the lives of those who loved them, and a case that remains one of Port Townsend's most haunting unsolved mysteries. To this day, the fate of Althea and Jeffrey Blankenship is unknown. The evidence points to foul play, and many believe that the key to solving their disappearance lies in the untold story of Glenn Bagley. Yet, with Bagley gone and the trail cold, Rita Bot was last seen on the morning of August 24, 1990, tending to the yard at her late mother's home in the 5500 block of 31st Avenue Northeast in Seattle, Washington. That morning marked the last time anyone saw or heard from her, and as time passed without any contact, concerns began to grow. A neighbor, who had noticed her absence, decided to check on the house. What they discovered inside was deeply unsettling. The television was left on, creating an eerie sense of an interrupted routine. The cat had been left without food or water, a stark departure from Rita's usual care for her pet. Even the coffee pot, still full, had been left untouched for so long that the coffee had grown moldy. Recognizing the troubling signs, the neighbor reported Rita missing. The investigation soon led authorities to Drew Richard Thompson, an unemployed landscaper with a troubling background. On September 7th, 2 weeks after Rita's disappearance, Thompson was charged with using her debit card. Over that period, he had withdrawn a total of $3,200 from her accounts. When the police arrested him, they found one of Rita's bank cards in his home, further deepening their suspicions. Rita's blue Honda, which had vanished along with her, was located on September 9th near the University of Washington campus. Inside the car, investigators made a grim discovery: blood in the back seat. Although DNA testing was still in its early stages at the time, forensic experts determined that the blood could have come from Rita. It matched only about 11% of the Caucasian population, and Thompson was excluded as a source. However, several hairs found in the car's back seat were microscopically similar to Thompson's, raising further questions about his involvement. His fingerprints were also discovered inside the vehicle. During questioning, Thompson admitted to stealing and driving Rita's car after her disappearance, but continued to deny any role in her fate.